have a shotgun.
Well, I gotta... Wait, that's a real shotgun?
Who can ever truly know how deep the rabbit hole goes in Night Springs?
The Summer Games Fest just happened a couple days ago, and at it, they announced the first expansion for Alan Wake 2. They surprise dropped it right on top of our heads. I absolutely loved Alan Wake 2. I think it'll go down in history as one of the most memorable gaming experiences that I've ever had. So naturally, I was hyped as hell to finally try the first expansion, and I just got done doing just that. I just finished playing it. And I have a lot of thoughts that I want to share with you guys. I'm going to show you some raw gameplay. I'm going to get into the review, but before I do that, hit that subscribe button. I talk about video games all the time on this page. I do day one reviews very frequently, other video game discussions as well, and survival horror always gets special treatment here. But I also review and discuss movies and TV shows as well. But anyway, let's talk about Night Springs. So Night Springs is the first chapter for Alan Wake 2, and when I saw the reveal trailer, I lost my shit because there wasn't just one or two, but there are three brand new playable characters. The first being Rose, Oh Dear Diner's very own love-struck waitress and fanfic writer, which when I saw that, I was already hyped as hell. She's arguably my favorite supporting character in the franchise, and the idea of getting to go deeper into her mind just seemed like a hilarious and fun idea. But it was with the reveal of the second two characters that I realized that there's really no limit to how absurd, in a good way, that Remedy is going to be with this game and this franchise. Because the second playable character was revealed to be an alternate version of Jesse, the main character from Remedy's other game, Control, a game that I have not played yet, but it's very high on my to-be-played list, and even higher now after playing through this expansion. But the third character you play as is Sean Ashmore. That's right, the actor. You don't play as his character from Alan Wake 2, Sheriff Breaker, nor do you play as his character from the other Remedy game, Quantum Break. You play as the actor. It's insane, and I guess that leads me to the story of this expansion. Each character plays through their own unique chapter, and these chapters were described as what-if scenarios, which I found to be such a funny statement because the narrative of Alan Wake 2 is already so batshit crazy and multi-layered and just meta and fourth wall breaking and steeped in a multiverse already that feeling the need to differentiate these chapters as being non-canon just sounded like an outright joke to me. And I'm sure there's already a bunch of Alan Wake fans and enthusiasts busting out those whiteboards explaining how all of these chapters are tied and connected to the main narrative in the main game. So I guess my point is the story is already such a mindfuck that these chapters are just as likely to be legit canon as they are to being true what-if scenarios, even though they were told to us to be what-if scenarios. Now I'm going to talk about each chapter and what they mostly consisted of, so let's start off with Rose. The story of this chapter is that Rose gets a call for help from Alan, so she treks through the woods to the old folks' home to save him, and along the way she has to deal with Alan's evil twin brother, who rides a motorcycle and wears a leather jacket, and she also has to kill hordes and hordes of enemies along the way. And at its core, that's pretty much all this chapter is, shooting enemies over and over. You start off with a shotgun and a rifle, and you get more ammo than you probably got in the entirety of the base game, and more health kits and pills than you'll know what to do with. It's pretty bare bones, but it's fun nonetheless, especially since one of my main critiques with Alan Wake 2 was that I wished there was about 10 to 15% more combat in that game. I often felt like there were long stretches of that game where I never felt like I was in any real danger because there were barely any enemies. So this chapter definitely scratched that itch, just being able to unload on countless shadow creeps. But where the Rose chapter shines the most is in its funny writing, her interactions with Alan's evil twin, her internal monologuing. It was all just so funny and so entertaining. Then there's the Jesse chapter. This chapter brings you back to Coffee World, where you are searching for your missing brother, and you'll be solving some riddles, doing some puzzles, and fighting a handful of enemies until you get to the warehouse. And this chapter, in my opinion, was definitely the weakest. Don't get me wrong though, I still enjoyed it, and I still thought it was fun to play through, but it didn't really do anything super memorable or different in my opinion in terms of story or the gameplay mechanics. It actually felt to me like the structure and the gameplay of this chapter was just like a scrapped hour of a Saga Anderson chapter. Also, I just wanted to interrupt the review for a second because I forgot to mention in the intro that they also announced a physical copy of Alan Wake 2. I'm a physical collector, so I'm so happy that this game is finally getting proper treatment. And that collector's edition, holy hell, rest in peace my wallet. Anyway, let's get back to the review. Then there's the Shawn Ashmore chapter. This one I think was definitely my favorite in terms of story and gameplay. It starts with Shawn Ashmore talking to Sam Lake on the set of Alan Wake 2. Then Shawn finds himself sucked into the multiverse where different versions of himself are being hunted by Warland Door. But then Shawn gets himself motivated and decides to try and be the hunter himself. This chapter definitely has the most going on for it in terms of its structure and its gameplay. Unlike the other two chapters, there's also multiple locations in this one. First, the Brightfall Woods, then the Ocean View Hotel, and it actually gets some gameplay sections in its own unique locations that only happens in this chapter. And the story in this chapter also seems like it's the most likely to actually be canon, at least in my opinion, but you can just tell that with this chapter, Remedy really wanted to shatter any and all expectations of how weird they can be, of where their limits actually are, and it definitely paid off. But overall, I really enjoyed the first expansion, but I do have some critiques as well. First off, on a technical sense, I noticed that these chapters didn't perform as well as how I remember the base game performing. For example, sometimes when I would pick up resources, or reload my weapons, or take a health kit or swallow some health pills, the animations would never actually finish, and also some voice lines would repeat far too often, especially in the Rose chapter, to the point where I thought to myself, this kinda reminds me of a PS2 game where the main character would just say the same line every time they killed an enemy. None of this was game-breaking though, and I can't even say it really took away from the experience, but it's still worth mentioning. I also wish though that there were a couple more new things in this expansion. Like I said though, the Shawn chapter has 1 or 2 tiny new locations, but I wish each chapter at least had one small area that wasn't in the base game, or maybe a new unique weapon to this expansion, or a new boss fight, just something like that to make it feel like it wasn't just the same assets rearranged. But anyway, that's my quick and brief thoughts after playing through the first Alan Wake 2 expansion called Night Springs. Have you played it yet? If you have, let me know what you thought about it in the comments. If you haven't played it yet, let me know. Do you plan to play it, or are you gonna ignore it completely? Once again, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.